Hello, welcome. It's so good to have everyone here. Let's get ourselves started. But before we begin, I would like to do an acknowledgement to country. So I acknowledge that I am recording this meeting from the land of the Wurundjeri people and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the various lands in which we meet today. In the spirit of reconciliation, Waka-Kiri acknowledges the traditional custodians and elders past, present and future of Australia upon which our festivals take place and their connections to land, sea and community. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. Before we begin, I thought I would like to introduce you all to our festival director, Adam Loxley, who would like to say a few words before we officially begin this session. Adam is the co-founder of Waka-Kiri, which is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. Big milestone. Take it away, Adam.
Thank you, Tony. Yes, absolutely. 30 years, very big milestone. But I'd just like to start by saying, I just want to say a big thank you to all of the schools that are participating this year. It's been a tough 2 years of COVID. Waka-Kiri certainly felt it. We didn't do anything for the first in 2020, and a lot of our shows got cancelled in 2021. So hopefully this year, touch wood, it's all good. And also, look, I know it's also really tough for teachers at the moment with all the limitations that are happening around COVID, and I know that you're all under the pump. So thank you so much for putting in that extra effort and being part of Waka-Kiri this year. We really appreciate it, as we always do. I think performing art teachers that do performing arts at their schools are the best teachers, because they really do put in that extra effort and go above and beyond. So thank you very much. Waka-Kiri is turning 30 this year. We've chosen Rise as our signature motif. We chose Rise because it represents optimism and change after the last 2 years. We thought it was appropriate. Also, another change you might have noticed is that Waka-Kiri isn't a competition anymore. We do still have awards and prizes, but we're not a competition. But our ethos is great stories inspire change. And Waka-Kiri's always been about that. But that's officially our ethos now. And so, yeah, if you're looking for any inspiration for your stories this year, start there. It's all about, giving students a voice, and we want them to be change makers in the future. Now, Tony's going to talk more about this, but what makes a good story? Jason Coleman once said to me that we watch a good story, but we feel a great one. And that's what I think storytelling is all about. It's all in the telling, making people feel that emotion, getting that message across. So yes, Tony's going to take you through all about telling great stories. But yeah, there's a little bit of inspiration for you there. And so talking of good storytellers, I'm going to hand you back over to Tony, who loves to tell a good story, and say, congratulations, guys, and have a great year this year. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you produce on stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Really great to have Adam here talking about, I lost my screen, 1 second. Talking about the milestone of Waka-Kiri. I think 30 years is a huge milestone in terms of what has been achieved by our schools over that time. I'll bring my screen back up again for you all. So there it is there. I thought I might take the opportunity right now and just explain who I am as well. I have been with the organisation for 8 years. I started as a facilitator where we provide artists in schools to help create story dances for schools that need a little bit more support. So I started in that capacity. I worked with schools in creating story dances. So I've had a lot of experience and time in working on story dance the story dance process. And now I am responsible for sending out those artists to schools to help with that process as well. So I am also personally honored to be part of this organization and help support arts education within schools. And I would like to say thank you to every teacher here today who is fighting the good fight to foster arts-based learning for your students. Your tireless efforts are celebrated here, and I hope that this session will continue to inspire your contribution to supporting the power of artistic storytelling in education. Now, during this presentation, I will pause at the end of most of the slides to answer any questions you may have. So feel free to turn on your mic and say hi, or maybe send me a message privately, or if you're happy for others to read it, put it into the chat and I'll answer that question to the best of my ability. Don't be shy to ask a question because someone else may be thinking the same thing. So without further ado, let's get into this presentation. So first, I'm going to start with the guidelines for Waka-Kiri, which all schools do need to know. Now, this information is available on our website, so you might have seen this in a leaflet sent to your school when first signing up. Essentially, this information tells you what a Waka-Kiri performance is all about. With that in mind, it's important that we break down exactly what these guidelines are, so to ensure that every school gets off on the right foot. Dance pun intended. So a Waka-Kiri story dance is a 3 to 7 performance by a group of students that theatrically tells a story using a combination of dancing, acting, creative movement, sets, props, costumes, projection, and to pre-recorded music. Basically the whole kit and caboodle. Waka-Kiri video entries can creatively be edited with special effects. So I'll talk a little bit more about Waka-Kiri video as we go along, because we do have some schools that are participating in that stream. Now, story is one of the fundamental components of a Waka-Kiri performance. I'm going to touch on types of stories a lot in this presentation, but at the end of the day, schools can basically tell literally any story they like. This might be aligned with a particular theme that the school is exploring in other learning areas. It might be reflective of the experiences that students have encountered. It might be highlighting circumstances that are occurring in the local community or tackling an issue that's important to the wider community. At its core, your story is sending a message of some type. So what are you trying to say? That's the fundamental question. Having this in mind will help engage your school community and drive how this story is told by your performers. There has to be that connection there. So yeah, here at Waka-Kiri, we've seen many different stories. As you can imagine, in the last 30 years, there's been an array of stories presented to us, whether they be about climate change, bullying, the bushfires, because obviously these stories are of concern to schools. And we find that if schools will have a far better result if they choose a story that's engaging with the class or community that's involved in telling that message. You know, stories come from the heart, are really powerful, and that will make for a really captivating performance. So your school might present a story about things like reconciliation, raising awareness about community issues. It might be an environmental story that talks about deforestation, animal welfare that highlights endangered species, mental health concerns about bullying, cultural diversity stories that, you know, showcases traditions of others that live around us, human rights stories about immigration, or stories that, you know, depict historical moments such as the rights of women to vote. All of these stories are, you know, extremely powerful. They also send a very strong message, and they can be, you know, quite heavy in some ways as well. So don't be afraid if you feel like you want to go down the road of just presenting an entertaining story. We value those as well, because it really does transport the audience to, you know, an exciting world. And, you know, sometimes those those mystical, magical fairy tale stories also send a really strong message as well. So don't be afraid to go down that road. The options are basically endless. And that is what I really want you to take away from this, is that any story that you choose to tell and that's important to your students and important to your school will be heard. Now, Adam mentioned that this year we have a signature motif. A signature motif is basically a theme that we thread into our events yearly, and it is an optional element that you could use a signature motif as a springboard for story planning or story ideas. Now, as Adam mentioned, the 2022 motif this year is Rise, and you know, you might use that as a way to create maybe a positive story idea that could be, you know, uplifting for your students based on their experiences in the last 2 years. We want, you know, 2022 to rise above the challenges that we've all been facing recently, which is why we chose that in the first place. So that might be of use to you when it comes to what story to tell. But I recommend that whatever story you choose, it should tap into what's important. You know, our ethos is about great stories inspire change. Therefore, this is something that schools can also take on board to tell that message as well. So it's worth mentioning again that Waka-Kiri is no longer a competition. We felt that this was a really good trajectory for the organisation to support the creativity process of which schools engage in and present at our live or video events. So at the end of the day, any story that's presented, whether that be through live or video, is celebrated, no matter what the story is. Our industry panel members who are invited to attend the show will still be there. They'll still hand out awards, but it really just recognises the creativity presented by schools in particular categories. So basically what that means is that if you are stuck on the type of story you wish to tell, maybe you'll go and look at our festival awards as inspiration. And we do have that on our website. So if you head to either the secondary, primary, or dance schools tab and click on story ideas and festival awards, that might give you some kind of inspiration, hopefully, on the types of stories in which you can tell. And as you can see here, we've got 10 categories, and I mentioned them all before as examples. And if you cover multiple areas, then that really means that you're basically being recognized for the layers in which your story dance presents to the audience. So don't be afraid to, you know, try and tap into different themes that sort of mix into one will make it a really engaging performance. One thing to draw your attention to is that every story should be easy to follow. So, you know, at the end of the day, we want our schools to follow a process that, you know, allows audiences to understand what is going on stage. It's important to develop a structure that allows, you know, the message to be seen and heard. Don't presume that the audience knows the context of your story. A classic example is performing what we call a retell story. So a retell story is like a fairy tale. I'll use the example of The Wizard of Oz. You know, everyone should know The Wizard of Oz, but not everybody has seen The Wizard of Oz, and therefore you can't expect audiences to know the premise around your story. Hence why the clear beginning, middle, and end progression is vital for audiences to understand what you're presenting. So yeah, just keep that in mind when it comes to, you know, choosing a story, that you don't want to miss opportunities in the storytelling process that basically create a vague explanation of what it is that you're trying to say. Don't presume what the audience knows. Really make it clear in your presentation. Are there any questions so far about that in terms of choosing the type of theme, type stories, or maybe what stories might be helpful to you? Feel free to chuck it in the chat or turn on your mic. All right, so every teacher should know that story dance is a combination of dancing, creative movement, and acting to tell that story. And that's something that I really want to highlight right now, is that story dancing is the key word here. It should be a blended approach. A common mistake that a lot of teachers make is that they think that a Waka-Kiri story dance is simply choreography. Dance should really only make up about 50% of the storytelling like presentation. The remaining 50% should utilize acting as a way to send that message. Getting the balance right will not only follow the guidelines of what makes a successful Waka-Kiri story dance, but it also reinforces to the audience the story you're wishing to tell. As we all know, art is really subjective. And so therefore, audiences will interpret your story in different ways. So if your school falls heavy on dance, then it jeopardizes the story element of your work, and vice versa. If the school relies too much on acting to tell the story, then it's not really a story dance. I hope that makes sense. So therefore, you want to get that balance really, really, really clear, so that, it utilizes both elements to the best of your ability. And I'll talk about how that can be done a little later on in terms of the model that you can apply in that process of what parts of your story involve dancing or creative movement, for example, and what parts maybe require more acting abilities. And in speaking of that, the dancing and the acting is combined together to make that performance. But what is layered then on top of that is characterization. You want there to be a clear understanding of the characters that are presented on stage. Simply dressing your students up in a costume like a character will not support the delivery of the story. Your students really need to know how to embody that character, so that it's molded to the use of dancing and acting to create a stronger representation. So, dressing your student up as a kangaroo is cute, but how does that kangaroo move in the choreography? How does that kangaroo act in the scenes? That is what makes the characterization in this performance stronger. Keep that in mind when it comes to working with your students in that capacity as well. It's also worth noting that Waka-Kiri is an inclusive experience for students. There is no emphasis on technical correct dance. What is valued is well-rehearsed dance. So therefore, schools can include any students, no matter their ability or skill sets in this area. The same applies to acting as well. As long as schools present well-executed material, they'll be very successful in their performance. We've seen some amazing stories presented to us using very, very, very simple choreography that is done well. So, often the more simpler the choreography is, the cleaner it looks on stage. That's just a tip from me to you. Do not underestimate the value of simplicity when it comes to designing the material you're working on. And that is really vital if you're maybe not as strong in a particular artistic kind of, ability. If you're not a strong choreographer, then keep it simple, because regardless of the movement, it should be effective enough to be able to tell that story. You don't have to show extravagant movement to be able to get across what is being told. I hope that makes sense in terms of the use of, or the combination, the creative combination. That's really what that term means, creative combination of dance and acting to tell that story. Has anybody got any questions in terms of that element of using dancing and acting in the construction of their story dance? Feel free to put it into the chat as well. I'll keep circling back into the chat just to make sure there are any questions. And if you do want to turn your mics on, go for it. All right. So I'm going to cover the production elements that are incorporated into a story dance item. Production or stagecraft elements, depending on your prior knowledge, refer to soundtrack, costume, lighting, projection, sets, and props. Now, the first thing to make note of is that these elements should not be relied on to tell your story. Rather, they should be used to enhance the storytelling process. I'll repeat that again and I'll unpack this a little bit more. Production elements, costumes, sets, lighting, props, all of that should not be relied on to tell your story. Rather, they should be used to enhance the storytelling process. Remember, it's a story dance, acting, dancing. That's the main catalyst here in terms of how you tell your story. The production elements layered on top just enhance the overall message. All right, so I'm going to touch on soundtrack, starting with soundtrack first. It's important that you try and find a piece of music that works with your story. It is not important to be... It's not important for you to find music that represents every single little part of your story. Cramming that much music into a short space of time just really doesn't work. And we've seen schools do this. It really isn't effective. My advice is less is more. So finding music that is, you know, highlighting the mood for each part of the story is better than trying to use music as a way to tell what's going on in the story itself. So this may mean that in the end, you only use about 4 to 5 different tracks for your entire item. In fact, that's something that I've done quite commonly when I've created story dances. I only use really maybe 4 tracks to tell that story, because you find music that sort of almost goes through that journey for you. You don't have to try and find, little 3-second pieces to then have to be edited together in order to tell that story. You're not using the soundtrack to tell the story. The soundtrack is enhancing what the movement and the acting is doing. Another thing to note is that narration and voiceovers can be used as an effective tool in setting the scene of your story or establishing context to the characters presented, or even used to transition the story from one scene to the other. So don't be afraid to use narration. I once made a piece that was talking about the rights of it was a historical story about women's rights, and I used political messages from the times to kind of enhance the context of the story. Now, obviously, it's the same with narration as it is with music. You don't want to overdo it and use narration as your way to tell that story, but it can be a really effective tool of sending that message. A word of advice also surrounding lyrics to a song: be sure you understand the meaning behind the words sung, as sometimes it might not support the idea you're trying to convey, or the words may not have the same meaning or have the same underlying meaning to what you're hoping that song would do. We've got to keep it as PG as possible. Obviously, this doesn't apply to instrumental music, but it's just really important that you keep a clear eye on the music choices so that you're covering all of your bases, not only in terms of story, but in terms of content as well. Now, as outlined in your production manual, both live and video entries require teachers to find the APRA code for the song/artist they're wishing to use in their performance. This is simply done to ensure that the artist receives royalties for their work and covers all of the copyright infringements or any potential copyright infringements that may occur. So most commercially released songs, so songs that you can find on Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, they're commercially released, which means that they will have an APRA code that's associated with them. Now, we're just wanting you to find that code and then put that into your profile, and then we take care of the rest from there. If you're using music that's not originally if you're using music that's original, you know, if you're creating your own soundtrack or you're using a local artist, that's totally fine. You obviously need to ask permission to use that song prior to adding it to your soundtrack. And if a song can't be found on APRA, you just need to make sure you put that artist and the name of that song into your profile so that it still gets credited when you present your story dance. I'm just going to circle back over to the chat because I can see a few things here. If I have a combined class, 11s and 12s, can they do a separate pieces within the dance, or do they have to be in all parts of the dance? That's really up to you, Kylie and Michelle. You know, utilizing your cast in different ways just ensures that the story is told effectively, but also it might mean that different groups do different sections of the story. You don't necessarily have to have them combined or on stage at the same time. It's really kind of up to you in how you use your cast in that sense. I hope that answers your question. And the next question you asked is, can you use the whole song, or do you have to only have a percentage of it? No, you can use the whole song. I've used a whole song, in fact, in one of my pieces before. So yes, you can definitely use the whole song. And if that whole song basically allows the story to progress clearly and go through the beginning, middle, and end, then go for it. Okay, so on the topic of music, a reminder to secondary schools, so those who are only in the secondary category, that the use of live singing can be incorporated into your performance. What this means is that your soundtrack involves a live singing element that then means that you're basically using a backing track to allow for that live singing component to be featured. Waka-Kiri will provide schools with a microphone on the day of your performance. So if you're wanting to incorporate live singing into your story, just make sure it doesn't detract from the performance and makes sense to the story. You know, I know that we probably all have access to talented students that can sing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it will work in the context of this performance. And just as the same rules apply surrounding pre-recorded music, just ensure that the lyrical content must be no higher than PG. Any questions about the live singing component for those who are doing secondary? Okay. Okay. So I'm now going to move a little bit more into what other things teachers should know, and that's got to do with sets, props, costumes, and projection. So we want schools to incorporate these elements, but we don't want you to use them in unnecessary ways if they don't contribute to telling a creative story. Again, the props, sets, and costumes should enhance the performance, not just fill the stage or fill the frame. It's not important that schools create what we call a blockbuster performance. A blockbuster performance means that you're utilizing big, expensive costume sets and props to sort of, you know, showcase the story you're presenting. You can achieve this, the ideas that you're wanting to explore in a minimalist approach as well. You know, at the end of the day, everything that is in your Waka-Kiri story dance should be used in the performance in a creative way. It shouldn't just sit there. And that really means that, you know, you're kind of working with the resources available to you, you know, and it in turn minimizes your environmental footprint which is of deep importance to Waka-Kiri, as we've made it our mission to create sustainable performances since we began in '92, and we encourage our schools to operate in the same way. So therefore, we hope schools can source or construct these elements if they have the ability to reuse them for future performances or can repurpose them in other ways. If you have any questions about this or approaches on how to create sustainable set pieces or sustainable costume pieces, please feel free to contact us at Waka-Kiri. We can direct you to simple resources that can help and achieve this within your school, and it still being cost effective as well. And it's important that you always, look at the production manual and the guidelines within the website, because we've also listed the restrictions in terms of the sizes of sets and props that can be utilized on stage. This is applicable to just live. And also it's just worth noting to avoid using any corporate logos and images. So, please just refer to the information on the website and the production manual before you start creating material, because we don't want you to come to the theatre and suddenly have our stage managers say no because it's got a Nike tick plastered all over the backdrop. You don't have the rights to that, so keep that in mind. Now, some of the exciting news, because this is something new that we've introduced into Waka-Kiri this year for primary schools, is that all primary, secondary, community groups, dance schools have access to the use of projection. So, which, is a great tool to incorporate, digital backdrops or moving images into your piece. And it does reduce the overall costs when designing your item. I've got a bit of advice when it comes to how you create projection work. Very simple. If you've got, and most computers have some kind of app already installed, whether that be iMovie or Movie Maker, basically choose your images, whether they be moving images or still images, and just ensure that they don't breach copyright. So make sure they're royalty free, and then piece them together in a Movie Maker application, and then put your music over the top. And that just ensures that everything transitions automatically. You don't have to worry about changing the digital backdrop to reflect each scene. It will just flow through naturally when you perform on stage. That's just a bit of advice to you when it comes to that process. Don't do it on PowerPoint. Our technicians don't have that ability. So, it has to be a movie, an MPEG, basically, at the end of the day. All right. Are there any questions about projection? Because this is a new element for primary schools. I hope that helps. Circling back into the chat real quick to see. No, nothing at this stage. That's fine. All right, we'll move on. All right, so I'm just going to quickly talk about Waka-Kiri video, because video for Waka-Kiri has become very popular within schools in the last couple of years for obvious reasons, and we have seen some amazing submissions come through. So I highly recommend that you check out our YouTube channel and view the 2021 video entries. We were blown away by the level of creativity that these schools presented. And this year we have a high number of schools across the country participating in Waka-Kiri video. And I want to let those schools know that participating in this stream is no less important than the live event. Yes, there are valuable experiences that come from being gained in performing live to an audience at a theatre, but there are some incredible things you can achieve by submitting what is essentially a story dance film. Or a short film, so the options are limitless when it comes to how you film a Waka-Kiri video entry. Now, the guidelines that I mentioned before in terms of story and costume sets and props, that all still applies. However, there are a few specific elements that teachers need to know that are only applicable to those participating in this event. So if this is not applicable to you, I apologize, but it is relevant for some of you that might be incorporating or might be involved in our video stream. So editing effects are like lighting effects. This will enhance the mood of the story. So just like what you would do if you were performing live, you would use lighting to reflect the mood, while your editing in a video does the same effect, okay? Filming in different locations can create a more realistic connection to the story. And so you don't have to film in like the school hall or the gym. You know, applying a site-specific approach will make your items stand out so much more. In fact, one of my favorites was a school that did a reconciliation story, and they did their entire video out in the bush, and it just looked incredible. And the same thing, you know, when it comes to your story, you might be creating something, if it's for video, for example, you might be centering it around the location, and that might drive the story ideas for you as well. So yeah, be creative is basically what I'm trying to say. And same goes with the camera angles. If you're not sure how to, you know, do this, you know, you don't have to use like a locked position. You can move the camera around, and there are some YouTube tutorials that will help with that as well. So that just covers a little bit in terms of Waka-Kiri video. Are there any questions real quick by anybody about what I've talked about so far? Feel free to turn your mic on and say hi, or put it into the chat box. I'll give you a minute to do so. All right, well, if there aren't any questions, I'll move on to the next segment of the presentation. Before I do that though, I just want to mention a few upcoming events that we have going on. This week we have our Careers Day, which is on Thursday, the 12th of May. Waka-Kiri holds an annual event for passionate secondary students who are interested in learning and creating pathways into the performing arts world. On Careers Day, it is our hope that students will be inspired, encouraged, and informed about what it takes to succeed in the entertainment industry. So if we've got some secondary school teachers here, and hopefully I might see you again at Careers Day. We'll have our guest speakers and Waka-Kiri ambassador James Lee, who's a musical theatre and cabaret performer, and Rachel Ward, who's an accomplished international stage and screen performer. And they'll be talking about their careers in the performing arts. And I'll be running an online workshop for students that you know, gives them some tips about their performance in Waka-Kiri. So it's a great opportunity for students to connect with our organisation and gain more insight into other aspects of the arts world, especially if they're new to this experience. It's a free event, okay? The other thing that you might want to be involved in is our Waka-Kiri Teachers Facebook group. We have a community page that allows for those who are participating in the events to connect with others and ask questions about the process in real time, or as real time as you possibly can be. It's full of teachers who have been part of the Waka-Kiri journey before, who love being part of this event and also love sharing their knowledge and advice with others. So if you're a rookie and you want more help, then I suggest that jumping onto the Waka-Kiri Teachers Facebook community page will be of use to you. I see a question. Can you project real newspaper headlines, pictures, and on the front page of the newspapers? Yes, you can, because I think that's public knowledge. It's the same. It's not breaching a copyright in that sense. So I think you do have some flexibility for, in that regards, Kate. I hope that answers your question. It's the same with so Kate, it's the same with the use of the voiceover as well. You know, it's kind of the same thing. It was a public recording, so therefore it can be publicly shared. It's more brands that you have to worry about. We've had like Toy Story things come on stage, and that caused issues. Okay. All right, Maria, I'm just going to answer your question regarding video. No, there's no expectation in terms of what programs you use. We've had schools do it on iPads. So don't be afraid to keep it simple. You can edit everything on an iPad or phone these days. So, and you'll be surprised on what your students know. So if you're unsure of that process, trust me, your students are probably all over it. When it comes to video editing, the likes of Instagram and TikTok these days, they might be able to help with that. Great. Yeah, so join that Facebook group if you can. That will help with answering any more questions you might have as you go along on your journey. All right, I'm going to move on to the 3 Secrets to Success document that we've provided all schools with it's on our website. So if you haven't downloaded it yet, I do suggest that you download it. It is the key tool in terms of the story planning process and the pre-production phases. It ensures that you again, get off on the right foot. In the last 30 years, we've seen many teachers make many common mistakes in developing a story dance, and this document kind of helps you avoid those oversights, applies steps that have been used by previous schools, which have been successful, and it ensures that every teacher enjoys the creative process. Because at the end of the day, we want you to have fun with this. And so, we're providing as much resources as we possibly can so that you feel confident and comfortable in this approach and return year after year and build that skill set for yourself as well. So I'm going to go into the 3 Secrets of Success document a little bit more. It can be a bit of a tongue tie if you say it really fast. I'll try not to say it so fast. All right. So it helps teachers with best practice. It's a guide in the planning and pre-production planning process of your story dance. It helps you set realistic expectations on what can be achieved with the resources you have available. Remember, we want you to produce a sustainable performance piece. So this document kind of guides you through that process. It also saves a lot of time when it comes to finalizing tasks and deadlines. We're essentially creating like a checklist so that you get everything done at a certain point and ensures that you're feeling as secure in the preparations leading up to performance day. And we just find that if schools utilize this, they actually have better results. And that's, what it's all about. So the first step is the audit. And I'm going to go deeper into what the audit is right now. So what is it? Well, it's all about knowing what resources you have available already within your school. And this might help in the decision-making on the type of story you might want to tell. The document will kind of ask you to think about the following things, such as, how many students do you have involved? Will you hold auditions? How many rehearsals do you have? Working backwards from the day to a performance day, whether that be filming day for video or performance day for live, working backwards from the day ensures to know how many rehearsals you can fit, who's going to support you doing this project. Have you got other teachers that you can delegate jobs to, or the wider community, such as parents? Maybe they can take care of different production elements, such as costume sets and props. What do you already have in terms of costume sets and props? You'd be surprised on the items that are already stocked in your school that could inform the way that you design a story. Who's running the rehearsals, or who's creating the material for the story itself, such as choreography and blocking, knowing the jobs of everybody. This is what the audit is for. It's kind of figuring out who can do what, where you can get things from, and then assigning the responsibilities accordingly so that you're not doing this all on your own. Stuff like location is also really important. Where these rehearsals are going to operate, because on our website, you'll find that there is a section called venue info. And in that venue info will be information regarding the dimensions of the stage. It also talks about the AV requirements, or I guess the availability of AV there if you're doing projection, and most of these theaters will allow it, but all that information is there. So maybe you use the information from the venue to set out where you rehearse. My advice is that you create a stock list, and then use that stock list of resources that you have, and this might be in terms of specifically like costume sets and props. And that might help brainstorm ideas of the different stories you can tell utilizing the items you already have access to, or maybe even going, okay, we have 30 yellow shirts. What else do we need? And so that helps you identify the gaps as well that you may have. One thing to note about costumes is that costumes can be sourced from a lot of different locations. You might want to utilize what your students already have to tell your story, or you might use the uniforms that they already are wearing at school. You might tell a schoolyard story, for example, and that cuts a lot of corners when it comes to finding particular costumes that you might design your story around the school uniform that your students wear. It's a really good representation of your school on stage as well. Alternatively, you might have students or parents who have connections to costumes from dance studios or amateur theatre groups who would be willing to lend or even, rent at a discounted price those items. So there's many ways in which you can sort of source these ones. And the same rule applies to, props and stuff like that. You might be able to find it from other locations. Okay, I just got a question from Karen. I'm just going to read it real quickly and then I'll see if I can answer it. Yes, the instruments can be used as a prop, but it's not necessarily used to help with the soundtrack. No, he won't be penalized. No, he won't be penalized. But don't be relying on the drum to be the key tool in the soundtrack. There needs to be something else that sort of supports that. Okay, good. Lovely. So that was just a question in regards to instruments on stage, and it essentially is counted as a prop. So yeah, but it won't be used. It can't be used as a use of soundtrack. The only tool is live singing, but that's only applicable to secondary schools. Okay, let me keep going. I'm going to move on to the next part. The next step is the story planning process. Okay. How to choose a story. I'm sure that's where a lot of people are struggling at this point. Now, we have a classic story model that I will share with you to help achieve your goals in the planning process. This is a simple yet effective design, but the key thing that makes it clear is story progression. So I'm going to talk more about the types of story that you could tell. The first thing to remember that every Waka-Kiri story dance needs a beginning, middle, and end. It needs to be progressive. If you can't describe your story within 3 sentences, it usually means that your story is a little too complicated and you need to be able to sort of strip it down or maybe find a new way to explain how each section will be presented. Because again, audiences, you can't assume that they will understand what you're trying to say. So being as clear and as concise as you possibly can will help. Maybe the story that you wish to tell could be something that is based on a theme at the school. Could that be performed? Like, is it humility, for example? Is that the theme? It was one of the themes for one of the schools I worked at about, I think it was random acts of kindness was one of their themes for the year. And I designed a story based around that, and that does enrich, particular learning outcomes in the classroom. Maybe it's an issue within the community too. Maybe you choose your story based on the types of costumes that you have to get, because it could help and save time, or again, just a reminder that you can come back and use the signature motif or the festival awards as a springboard for your story. Because I know that at the end of the day, schools want to be able to feature their students as much as possible on stage and give them equal opportunity or equal stage time. And I've got a little bit of a trick on how to do that in just a second, but I'm just going to jump into the chat real quick and just see if there's any questions there. It can be yes, yes, Kate. It can, the stuff like clapping can be, and clicking can be, it counts as a sound effect, but it's not the music. Hope that answers the question. You know, you might have music in the background and they're clapping along with it. Totally fine. All right. So I'm going to show you a story example. So here the theme is resilience. And as I said, a good Waka-Kiri story dance has a clear beginning, middle, and end. So in this story example, in the beginning, a group of students are dancing in the playground. One student can't dance very well. The other students tease and make fun of them. The student decides to attend dance classes. So that is essentially our orientation and the complication that our characters are facing in that moment, or character is facing in that moment. The next section is the middle. So the student goes to 3 different dance classes, jazz, ballet, and hip hop, and tries really hard to learn how to dance. This is still kind of the complication, but then also it's the journey. It's the exploration of getting to that final end result. And that leads to the end. So the student returns to school and shows off their new dance moves and blows everybody away, and they dance together in celebration. So that comes back to the idea of being resilient and persevering through adversity. But this has a really clear, you know, orientation, complication, and resolution pathway. It's not necessarily complicated, but what it does here, if you're a school that's trying to incorporate as many students as possible, the great thing about the middle part of that section of the story is that you could essentially create 3 different ensemble groups, large ensemble groups. So there could be an ensemble group for the jazz section, an ensemble group for the ballet section, and an ensemble group for the hip hop section. And this is just an example of styles here. You don't necessarily have to be incorporating this in terms of the styles that you approach, but the same rules apply in the middle part of that section. Maybe that's where your large group numbers occur in order to, you know, give equal stage time to every single student. Either way, it will help with, you know, the context. Now, you could essentially use this rule so that, you know, it could be put into the first part of the story or the end part of the story. It doesn't really matter. But other things to keep in mind is that I talked about that it needs to be an equal balance of acting and dancing. So for example, in the beginning part of the story, that could be an acting scene where the students act out, you know, the scene in the playground. And then at the middle part of the story is more dance orientated. And that the last part of the story is kind of a bit of both. It sort of has a bit of acting at the start of that end part of the scene, and then there's dancing at the end, and that's still a 50-50 kind of strategy there. So you can see that this approach really helps with not only, I guess, allocating groups, but it also kind of works in the way that it progresses clearly to the audience's eye, that you understand using dancing and acting as the tool. Now, you can actually expand on this. So this is simple and effective, but you can actually go even bigger. So the next phase that I usually like to go into is developing joining scenes. So I've got the same story example, but I've expanded upon it and actually applied what are called joining scenes. Now, these can join the beginning, middle, and end sections together, and it just creates more opportunity, more stage time, but more opportunity to tell the story in greater detail. It could be used as a way to transition from one scene to the other. So while this small acting scene is happening in, say, one section of the middle, so say the student went to jazz class, and then the student from the jazz class comes back to school, presents what they've learned at jazz class, and while that scene is unfolding, you can transition the group off stage, you can change the scene. And while that's unfolding, you know, the students are saying, no, you know, I'm not impressed by what you've done. You go back and try a different dance class. So then that transitions into the next scene. So you utilize these joining scenes not only as a way to obviously theatrically tell the story, but it also acts as a practical approach in moving groups on and off stage. All right. Is there any questions relating to that example, that model? Now, you're quite welcome to utilize this model and apply any type of story. Pick a theme, pick a like a story from a library and maybe apply that to this approach, so that you can really cover a lot of ground. You can essentially create lead characters from this and also ensemble characters as well. So that might help in featuring certain performers, or, you know, ensuring that you can do group mass pieces as well. Another thing to, you know, keep in mind of is that, you know, the finale doesn't need to necessarily be a group number. The finale can actually happen in, the big group number can actually happen in any part of the story. You could open your story with a big group number, or you can have a really big group number in the middle of your story. I also think that the finale needs to be a big group, kind of almost like a musical theater approach. Not necessarily. If your story doesn't require it, then I wouldn't go down that road. Maybe your story has a bigger dramatic effect if it finishes with one student on stage, as opposed to all students on stage. So don't be afraid to play and mix where the group pieces happen, the big group numbers, because it has to make sense to the story. You don't want to just chuck a finale dance at the end of a really like somber story or a very deep story. It doesn't make any sense at the end of the day. So a classic story model starts simple, as I explained, and can grow. You can add those joining scenes. The middle part of the story will allow for a large group numbers to be staged, and they can act as the journey to the resolution. And those joining scenes will create a stronger progression through that story. So I call them interludes, because I feel like that's what they do. They kind of interlock into the next part of that stage of the story, and allow audiences to kind of, I guess, refocus on the bigger picture. And as I mentioned, large group scenes, such as the finale dance, don't have to be at the end. All right, the last part to the 3 secrets of success is the schedule. Okay, and the schedule is all about planning. Okay, the more you plan, the better you'll be, trust me. A common thing is to run out of time, and you know, if you plan effectively, you could probably add more time if you needed to. Don't start your rehearsals until you've mapped everything out. You'll be surprised what little things pop up along the way. So any unexpected things can be dealt with as long as you have a clear trajectory of where you're getting to. Break down the story into parts and then break that story into weeks and when that is actually rehearsed, because not every student is required in every single scene. So you don't want to be wasting time scheduling Waka-Kiri rehearsals with the entire cast and you only work with a small group of students. You know, decide who you're working with effectively, but also ensure that whatever way you're sort of structuring that each group or each character, however you may say it, will get equal rehearsal time, so that you're not spending more time on one group and less time on the other, or you get stuck rehearsing one group and then suddenly you run out of time for the other. Start from the top. We have a template in the 3 Secrets to Success document that gives you a clear plan on how to design a rehearsal schedule, who's involved, what you need, you know, all that kind of stuff. Not only that, but it also makes sure that staff can commit to that process. So if you're delegating roles, you know that that staff member only is required for maybe 3 rehearsals out of the whole process, because they only need to attend to measure kids and then fit kids and then watch kids in a dress rehearsal if they're taking care of costumes, for example. You know, ensure that the schedule includes time to source production elements. So you want to put in your rehearsal schedule a deadline of when a particular prop is needed or costumes are required by, because you don't want to be leaving that up until the last minute, because you won't have that opportunity to do it like a dress rehearsal with those items or see if those items work. Because, you know, I've had many instances where you have this vision of a prop or something that you want to incorporate into the story dance, say material. That's always a really big one. And the material doesn't quite have the same effect that you wanted. If you got that material earlier and you actually scheduled to have that material sourced by a particular date, then you wouldn't have to backtrack on being able to A, find new material, or B, maybe go, oh, let's veto it because it's too hard, and then have to redesign your choreography. Just waste too much time. So set a date for costume sets and props so that it can be used in time for performance, okay? Especially when it gets to your dress rehearsal at the theatre on the day, because you want to make sure that you're practicing in stuff like hair and makeup as well, because you never know what could happen. Any questions in regards to the schedule? I know some of that probably is like common knowledge, but you'd be surprised how many, teachers get caught by this. And the good thing about the schedule too is it might actually even highlight to you, oh, that's actually not achievable. We shouldn't be doing that as part of our story. It's too much, so it actually kind of highlights for you things that are unattainable, and you might have to reevaluate how your story is being told so that you can achieve things effectively. And so and it's good. You want to realize these things in the early stages, as opposed to, again, getting to the last minute and having to make all these changes and find that you have to scramble for time and then feel very frustrated and upset over that. All right, well, if you don't have any other questions, everyone, you're free to go. Thank you very much for all of your time tonight. It was lovely to chat with you. We'll see you next time.